The Bella Twins appeared on a Moment of Bliss on SmackDown Friday night and confirmed their WWE Hall of Fame induction, which was first reported by WrestleVotes on Twitter. Whoever WrestleVotes is, they did get one story wrong a few weeks ago when they insinuated that Samoa Joe was hit with a wellness suspension. That was incorrect. And he or she, whoever they are, whoever runs the account, apologized for the error. They owned up to their mistake. I respect that. Not everybody does that, but they do tend to get more right than they get wrong. And on the Bellas, they got this one right. We've now got two more unconfirmed names said to be... And if you want my thoughts on the Bellas, I got into that last week. The whole video's up on the YouTube channel. I'm not getting into the Bella stuff again. They're as deserving as any other name they've put into this Hall of Fame in recent years. So, again, go back and listen to my thoughts on that. But we now have two more unconfirmed names said to be part of the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2020. First is a name long overdue. That being the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. Bulldog as in singular, not plural. They are not inducting the Bulldogs as a team with the Dynamite Kid, probably because they can't bring themselves to say Dynamite on television because Cody might crack a smile. You know they'd be petty like that. I mean, I'm only joking, but would you really be that surprised to find out that was the reason they're not inducting Dynamite Kid? His son Harry, Davey Boy Smith Jr., who's currently signed with MLW through the end of the year, per the Observer, will be the one doing the induction. I don't know if he'll also be accepting on his father's behalf. I think Bret Hart would be a great inductor for Bulldog, and then, Harry could do the acceptance speech. Unless Meltzer misspoke in the newsletter, but he seemed to indicate that Harry was going to be the one doing the induction. The Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation, I mean, they had some of the best WWE matches together in the mid-'80s. It's not an era that you think back when, if you're big on classic matches, work rates, and like Savage Steamboat WrestleMania 3, you had some of those in WWE, in the late 80s. But it was really more built on personalities and characters and the Hogans and the Macho Mans and the $1 Million Mans. But a lot of those, the Madison Square Garden shows and a lot of the Boston Garden shows and live events, they were relying on teams like the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation and the Killer Bees and the Rougeaus to be the ones to go out there and really carry the load as far as having like a long 15, 20 plus minute quality match. Sometimes they would end the night with them. They'd put someone like Hogan on in the middle of the show so that he can leave and get the hell out of there. And they would headline with these guys because they were going out there and knocking them out of the park night after night after night. So the Hart Foundation and the Bulldogs had some of the best WWE matches of that time period. And he came back, he had left the company, and when the Bulldogs left, he came back as a single star. He pinned Bret Hart in the main event of SummerSlam 1992, Wembley Stadium, won the Intercontinental Championship in the biggest match of his career. And then he got caught using steroids or importing them. It may have been HGH. I'm fuzzy on all the specific details, exactly what it was. But he and the Ultimate Warrior got fired right around the same time for the same reason. He went to WCW. His run there will be most remembered, I think, or at least to me. I will most remember his WCW run, the first WCW run, for the mini-movie that he was part of with Sting to hype up their big match against the evil duo of Sid Vicious and Big Van Vader at Beach Blast 93. This was the mini-movie they shot with Cheatham the Midget trying to blow up the boat with Sting on it. But the kids on the beach, they went over to Davey and they told Davey, what was going on, and he saved Sting just in the nick of time, and then the boat blew up. These horrible effects. $100,000 WCW spent on this thing. The acting in that little mini movie makes Lana look like Meryl Streep. If you've never seen it before, you can go find it, but you're not going to be prepare to be amazed by what you see. So the Bulldog came back to WWE in 94. He was jacked as ever. I mean, he was gigantic when he came back. He formed a tag team with Lex Luger, the Allied Powers. That didn't really go anywhere. They turned him heel later that year, put him with Jim Cornette. He had a pay-per-view main event late 95, with Diesel for the world title at one of the In Your House shows. That was so bad that I think it was Bruce Pritchard who said this. Vince McMahon, who was on commentary that night, threw his headset down in disgust when the show was over. As soon as they went off the air, he just threw it down in disgust and stormed off. Some guys just don't have good chemistry together. You know, there were other Diesel matches that were actually pretty good, like his match the following month at Survivor Series against Bret Hart when he dropped the championship. That might have been the best match the two of them had. You know, 2 months later, the Bulldog, he was back in the main event. He had another classic match against Bret. What's the common denominator here, by the way? Bret Hart, I'm just saying. But yeah, 2 months later, In Your House, Hershey, Pennsylvania, Bulldog and Bret for the championship. I mean, that was a bloodbath with Bret. Not as memorable as their Wembley match, but it was still an excellent match. The point is, sometimes you put two guys together who independently, you know, they're talented and they can have good matches, but together it just doesn't work. So he won a third tag team championship the following year with his brother-in-law, Owen. First two titles came with the Dynamite Kid. His third title came with Owen Hart. He became the first ever European champion. When they introduced that title, they had a big tournament that climaxed in Germany. They taped that match, aired it on Monday Night Raw. So, like, you think of it as a Raw match, right? But it really technically wasn't. I don't think it was a Monday Night Raw taping or anything, but they aired the match on Raw, and it was, as you would imagine, between Bulldog and Owen. It was a fantastic match. And he was part of the Hart Foundation faction in 97. He was part of that great 10-man tag at the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view, which is very depressing now to go back and watch when you realize that 4 out of the 5 members of that team, the first 4 members of that team that walk out during the introductions, are now all gone. All but Bret Hart are dead. That's pretty depressing. Bulldog supposedly paid $150,000 of his own money out of his own pocket to buy himself out of his WWE contract after the screw job in Montreal so that he could jump over to WCW. With Bret. Owen wanted to go too. I mean, Owen wanted out as well. He wanted to join his brother and his brother-in-law, but Vince McMahon wouldn't let him leave. Wouldn't let him out of his contract. Perhaps things might have turned out differently if he had. But that WCW jump is really what led to... Bulldog already had issues. He had drug problems that have been well documented, but it really began this downward spiral when he got hurt on that trap door. The Warrior was going to be making this dramatic entrance. The Ultimate Warrior was coming to WCW. And they were teasing a match with Hulk Hogan. And on this particular pay-per-view was Fall Brawl in 98, which you could find on the network. The Warrior was going to be making this dramatic entrance later in the show, using a trap door underneath the ring mat. And in his match, I think Bulldog was in a tag team match, I think, and Davey got slammed. He might have gotten slammed a couple of times onto the trap door. And he got hurt real bad. Thing is, though, he kept wrestling for like another month. Some people think, oh, he got hurt and he was out. No, he wrestled for another month. So if he was hurt, and in his book, Bret Hart says that Davey had a bigger problem at the time. He had a morphine addiction. That was a bigger problem than anything else, he says. But if he did get hurt on that trap door, he may have been so hopped up on pain meds or morphine or whatever it was that it just took that long for him to realize that something was wrong. And it wasn't until months later he ended up bedridden in a hospital. He was in a body cast. He was worried he might not live. Doctors were telling him even if he did live, he might be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And he ended up with a staph infection. He came very close to dying. I mean, it got very dire in that hospital for the Bulldog in 99. And while he was in the hospital is when he got the express mail envelope in the mail from WCW with his termination papers. That's very nice. He did recover. He came back to WWE later that year. This was the phase where he started wearing jeans for his matches. There was some talk that maybe he would get a run with the WWF title. He really was no condition for that. And he ended up many months later being sent home. You know, and he really was a mess. He was a mess by that point. And WWE sent him home to get treatment. 2 years later, he passed away, age 39. He actually teamed with his son. He teamed with Harry for a few matches before he died, so those would have been his final matches. I think Harry was only like 15 years old at the time. He got started very young. But those were the Bulldogs' final matches. So you kind of look at his career. He was part of an influential tag team, and some would argue maybe one of the best tag teams of that era. He headlined major pay-per-views. He was part of the top heel faction in the company, with multiple championships and all that. He was part of some legendary matches. So there's no case to be made against the British Bulldog being in the Hall of Fame. The Bulldog is more than worthy of a Hall of Fame induction. And a separate report from Wrestling Inc., which is not yet confirmed, claims that another Hall of Fame inductee on tap for this year is JBL. John Bradshaw Layfield will also be inducted as part of this year's 2020 Hall of Fame class, which would make the class, as things stand, with confirmed and unconfirmed names, as things stand. It looks like Batista, the NWO, the Bella Twins, JBL, Jushin Thunder Liger, and the British Bulldog. So that's the way the class looks so far. I'm sure they're not done. There's probably another one or two names. Whatever my personal views are of the man, and I'm not his biggest fan, you can't say that JBL is not worthy of a Hall of Fame nod. He started out with the whole Justin Hawk Bradshaw gimmick, which was very much not Hall of Fame worthy, but you got to start somewhere. He started out Justin Hawk Bradshaw. He transitioned into one half of the new Blackjacks tag team. Some people may have blocked that out of their memory. He never really had much in the way of major success. He really didn't, until he got put together with Ron Simmons. And they were the Acolytes. They were part of the Ministry of Darkness. They broke off from the Ministry, or at least the Ministry ended, and they kind of went off and became the APA. And that's when he really started to have some success, and he was, an entertaining act. That clothesline from hell that he gave Shane McMahon at SummerSlam in 2000, when Shane interfered in the main event. Actually, 2000, is it 2000? No, 2001. SummerSlam 2001, when Shane interfered in the main event with Booker T and The Rock for the WCW title. And he's just being pesky and he's interfering. And here come the APA to chase him off. And Shane sees it. They're chasing him around the ring, or at least Ron Simmons is. But he don't see that around the bend on the other side of the ring, JBL's waiting for him. And as he comes running around, JBL catches him. He clotheslined the soul out of that kid. Oh, one of the greatest things I've ever seen, if you've never seen that spot before. So, in 2004, they needed to make a new star on SmackDown. So one day he shows up looking like J.R. Ewing. He's got John Bradshaw Layfield, just a total makeover from what we remember him as when he was part of the APA. Like, it was an overnight character overhaul for this guy. And he was friends at the time with Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero was the WWE champion. And Eddie tried real hard to, make him believable in the role and just do what he could to help get this guy over. And they had that match at Judgment Day, that bloodbath where I thought Eddie was going to die. He lost so much blood. He went into shock when the match was over. I think they took him to the hospital. The ring mat, when that pay-per-view, when that match was over, the ring mat looked like something out of a Saw movie when that match was over. And then the next month, I think that was the bull rope match, I believe? The next month, JBL won his first WWE Championship. His first and only. And he went on to hold it for 8 months. He became the longest reigning champion in SmackDown history. I don't know if he still is or not. That record might still hold up. But he held the title for 280 days before dropping it to John Cena, WrestleMania 21. And he did for John Cena what Eddie Guerrero 1 year earlier had done for him. He put him over, he dropped the title to him, and that's what began Cena's rise as a headliner in WWE. Cena had an I Quit match with JBL at Judgment Day in 2005, very similar to the bloodbath that JBL had with Eddie Guerrero. I mean, Cena was covered in blood when the match was over. And, they really... I always think back to the no-holds-barred match that Shawn Michaels had with Diesel the month after he beat Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12. Shawn would come out, he was dancing around, and he was doing these poses, and there were a lot of guys watching the product at the time who were like, who the hell is this guy? He's coming out, he's dancing like a Chippendales dancer, he's got the earrings, he's a girly champion, this guy. And what did the company want to do? They wanted to toughen him up. They wanted to put Shawn in some matches that he would come across as somebody who, hey, this guy can fight, this guy can brawl. So he had the match with Diesel, and then a few months later he had the match with Mankind. And I think they did a good job of kind of toughening him up in the eyes of a lot of the fans. And Cena, I don't know if Cena needed that as much as Shawn did back then, but, Cena wasn't coming out, dancing around in some of the gear that Shawn used to. But, he had to have some matches like that to kind of prove that he can hang in these different types of matches. And that thing was an absolute bloodbath. And I think one of the best matches of that Cena era. And Cena would go on to have a lot of great matches after that. But his first truly great John Cena match was that Judgment Day match against JBL. The WrestleMania match, I don't remember as being anything special. I don't think it was that good. The Judgment Day match, the I Quit match, was an excellent match. And so he was also a United States champion with JBL. He was an Intercontinental champion. When he retired, he became an announcer. He left. Then he came back as an announcer again. And he was really good in the role. When he came back in 2011 or 2012, whatever it was, I remember thinking, it's a breath of fresh air to have JBL back. He's really good in this role. But then he just became completely obnoxious. Total mouthpiece for Vince McMahon on commentary. He would bring down the shows. He wasn't obnoxious in a good, heel announcer way. He was actively making the shows worse. He got progressively worse as an announcer as time went on. He went from being maybe the best commentator in the company at the time to the worst. That's how far he fell. He's also credited with the idea of starting the Tribute to the Troop shows that WWE still does each year. That was his brainchild. That was an idea that he suggested to Vince McMahon. And they still do them today, although last year I think was the first time that it didn't air on TV. But then there's another part to JBL's career that can't be ignored. And they won't bring this up at the Hall of Fame, but I'll bring it up. And that's the bullying and the hazing allegations that are part of his legacy too. And there have been a lot of stories over the years that involve a lot of different wrestlers, Edge and others, and things that happen in the showers that I'm not going to get into. And you could chalk some of that up to, that's just, that's just typical hazing. They do that in football locker rooms and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. Some of these stories go a little beyond just ribbing and hazing in the locker room. But, a lot of the stories that you hear came when he was drunk. He apparently is or was a terrible drunk and would make an ass out of himself. And Bob Holly tells a great story in his book about Bradshaw fucking with Steve Blackman at an airport. And Steve Blackman was nobody that you wanted to mess with. When you think of the names of some wrestling tough guys that you've heard these stories about over the years, you think of guys like Meng or Steve Williams and Stan Hansen and people like that. Harley Race. Steve Blackman you can put on that list. He was not somebody you wanted to mess around with. Steve Blackman, by the way, is now a bail bondsman, in case you've not seen any of his commercials on YouTube. He will not be going into acting anytime soon, but he's a bail bondsman in Pennsylvania. Looks the same as he did 20 years ago. Maybe a little grayer in the hair, but it's amazing. It's like he hasn't aged a day. But Blackman warned him. Bradshaw was messing around with him. He kept patting him on the ass or something, and Blackman doesn't do that. He goes, listen, you better stop doing that. So, of course, JBL didn't. He's probably drunk. And Blackman lost it. He slugged him. As the story goes, he got his leg caught. Holly said that Blackman got his leg caught. I don't know if it was in the baggage handle or on a piece of luggage or whatever. He went to kick. And Bradshaw is very lucky that Blackman did not get that kick off. He would have killed him. And Blackman told him that. He goes, I'm going to kill you. And then this continued on. They got to the hotel. It just so happened when they got there that, Bradshaw was there checking in. And, he tried to go over to, I guess, maybe smooth things over. And Blackman said, I don't remember exactly what the words were that he used. He wasn't going to He wasn't going to do anything there. He said, but it's coming. He goes, I'm going to finish you. I'm going to end you. And he wasn't playing around. I'm sure at that point, JBL probably got the message and said, uh-oh, what have I gotten myself into? Because when they got to the building, when they got to the arena, Bradshaw was very smart. He knew, I gotta make this right, or this is not going to end well for me. He apologized in front of the entire locker room to Steve Blackman. Unprompted, unprovoked. Nobody asked him to do it. Blackman didn't ask him to do it. He apologized to him for what he had done in front of everybody, and that was it. It was basically so he would spare his life. Because he knew Blackman was serious. If Blackman said, I'm going to kill you, he was going to kill him. You know, Blackman he's had a very interesting life. If you ever heard his story before, he got sick many, many, many years ago. I mean, he came into WWE in 97. I remember thinking, who the hell is this guy? But he was around even 10 years earlier than that, but he had been overseas, I think, in Africa. I could have my details wrong here, but I think he contracted malaria. He was bedridden. He was on his deathbed. And it took years for him to recover from that. And I think he had to teach himself whatever it was, karate or taekwondo, and just kind of get his body back to what he used to be. And yeah, he had a rough life. He's not somebody to mess around with. If he says he's going to end you, he's going to end you. So he apologized, and I mean, at that point, Blackman realized, look, I'd be a real asshole to kick this guy's ass after he just apologized in front of everybody. One of the all-time great stories is the time JBL got knocked on his ass by Joey Styles. He got put down by an announcer. Little Joey Styles. On their Tribute to the Troops trip to Iraq back in 2008, JBL was just bullying him nonstop the entire trip. Wouldn't leave him alone. And finally, Joey had enough. He punched him right in the face and knocked him down. I don't know if he knocked him out, but he definitely punched him in the face and knocked him down. And guess what? JBL didn't fuck with Joey again after that. He was awfully quiet for the rest of the trip. So you can talk about his achievements and you can talk about all of his titles and accomplishments and his place in history. And I think he's a perfectly worthy Hall of Fame inductee for the success that he had. But stories like that are as much a part of his career as any titles that he has ever won.